Chairman, and my thanks to the ranking members. In addition, let me take this opportunity also to thank the Joint Inquiry staff under the direction of Eleanor Hill for a difficult process that they've gone through, but one that has been very effective. Mr. Chairman, I'm convinced that these public hearings were created to explore what, if anything, went wrong in the days and the events that led up to September the 11th. I'm convinced that additional review is likely and probably needed, and that we will establish an independent commission to carry on the work of this joint inquiry and to review other agencies that were not the focus of this current inquiry. What's gone unmentioned until today, and I'd like to reinforce it, is how many times the system worked. Most members of this inquiry have spent time across this country and around the world with our intelligence community and law enforcement individuals, inquiring about what they knew and when they knew it, but more importantly, what they needed. What we heard was crucial, I think, to this inquiry, but what we saw was invaluable to the American people. Members of our intelligence and law enforcement community working unthinkable hours in primitive surroundings without family or friends, things we all take for granted. I mention this to my colleagues because our focus shifted for the last 12 months to what happened. Their focus has been and continues to be on protecting the American people from the evil that exists globally. Though mistakes were made that contributed to the 9/11 attack, the men and women who work on the American people's behalf, around the world, do this with the resources and authorities that we supply. And let's not forget, they are the best in the world. As this committee, as this inquiry, hands off the review to a commission, I hope we will, as members, refocus on what we can do to complement the dedication of so many around the world with the resources that fill the gaps that all of us know exist. And with having said that, Director Tenet, Director Mueller, let me ask you, 1 year later, in hindsight, what would you have done differently? Also recognizing the fact, Director Mueller, that you weren't in your capacity, but if you will, give us insight as to possibly where the Bureau should have changed earlier, if they should have. I'll turn to Director Tenet first.
I think that personally, when I think about this, the one thing that strikes me that we all just let pass from the scene after the Millennium threat was this fellow who tried to cross the border from Canada into the United States. There were no attacks. There were no Americans killed. We didn't have any hearings. We didn't talk about failures. We didn't talk about accountability. We just assumed the system would keep working because it prevented the last attack. He tried to cross the border, and I think one of the things that everybody should have done is say, what does this mean, more carefully, rather than just moving from this threat to the next threat, assuming it had been disrupted. What does it mean for the homeland? Should we have taken more proactive measures sooner? Hindsight is perfect, but it is the one event that sticks in my mind. Second, and again, hindsight is perfect, we should have taken down that sanctuary a lot sooner. The circumstances at the time may have not warranted, the regional situation may have been different, and after 9/11, all I can tell you is we let a sanctuary fester, we let them build capability, and there may have been lots of good reasons why in hindsight it couldn't have been done earlier or sooner, and I'm not challenging it because hindsight is always perfect, but we let them operate with impunity for a long time without putting the full force and muscle of the United States against them. I've just heard a discussion about, which one of my people is accountable. I need to tell you something. We've gone through this exercise about how many people and how do you count them, and the truth is the people that have been working this are absolute heroes. And if I reflect back on my own responsibility, I triple the size of CTC, quadruple the budget, and in hindsight, I wish I'd said, let's take the whole enterprise down and put 500 more people there sooner. I couldn't make that choice at the time because of all the other competing things I had to do that everybody would hold me responsible against failing for. But in hindsight, I wish we'd thrown more people at it in some way to give those people the relief because, the tempo and the pace and the exhaustion, notwithstanding the fact that on the watch list issue, procedures may have not been perfect, it's not an excuse. They were exhausted. There were never enough of them. There were never enough of us, period, across the range of targets we cover. So I think about that as well. The other thing I would say to you, quite frankly, is there was never a systematic thought process to think about how you play defense. It comes back to the guy trying to cross the border. You can disseminate all the threat reportings you want. You can do the strategic analysis about airplanes. You can do the strategic analysis about car bombs, truck bombs, assassination attempts, fast boats, and everything else. And you can put all that out there to people. Unless somebody is thinking about the homeland from the perspective of buttoning it down to basically create a deterrence that may work, your assumption will be that the FBI and the CIA are going to be 100% flawless all the time, and it will never happen. Notwithstanding all the improvements we've made with your help, it's not going to happen. And I think one of the things that we've learned is in hindsight, the country's mindset has to be changed fundamentally. No more sighs of relief. We're in this for a long time. We have to get about the business of protecting the country with the private sector, the chiefs of police, the state and locals, now. Because the threat environment we find ourselves in today is as bad as it was last summer, the summer before 9/11. It is serious. They have reconstituted. They're coming after us. They want to execute attacks. You see it in Bali. You see it in Kuwait. They plan in multiple theaters of operation. They intend to strike this homeland again, and we better get about the business of putting the right structure in place as fast as we can.
I will come back to you in a minute on the coordination and communication with local law enforcement. Director Mueller.
Well, looking back at it and seeing what our greatest vulnerability was in retrospect, it was the fact that we had not hardened our cockpits. We had assumed that hijackers on a plane will want to get the plane to the ground. We, unlike the Israelis with El Al, did not harden our cockpits. And all the warnings that we got probably would not have led us in that environment to take the step of requiring airlines to harden the cockpits to prevent hijackers from coming in and taking over planes and crashing them into buildings. That is in retrospect, when you look back at it, you ask what could have been done to prevent this attack. That is the one thing that as a country, as an industry, that could have been done to protect this type of occurrence.
Whose responsibility would that have been?
Can I say something to you, sir?
Yes, sir.
The thing is unless, Bob, excuse me, unless the program is systematic, they watch all of this very carefully. It's not just about fixing one thing. You have to think about it from a systemic perspective. It's not just harden the cockpits. You have to look at the whole system. So if it's not being done simultaneously, the terrorist just sits back. If you look at how these people behaved, you understand how they've collected data against an open society for years, it's not just one thing or one system.
Right. For the Bureau, from the perspective of the Bureau, the two, I think, critical changes necessary were, one, to adopt a new way of looking at managing cases. The Bureau traditionally has run cases through Office of Origin. Each individual special agent in charge is in charge of the cases that arise in that particular field office or that division, and there can be discussion and tension as to who gets the Office of Origin. Well, New York did a terrific job as Office of Origin for UBL, but New York is one field office. When you're looking at international terrorism, it's important for us as an institution to have centralized all information relating to UBL, whether it comes from Portland, Oregon, or Portland, Maine, or Miami, or from Hamburg, Germany, or someplace else. Centralized, not only centralized information flow, but also centralized accountability for assuring that investigations, wherever they may pop up, have the required manpower to be addressed. And we as an institution have, over the years, placed the accountability in the field offices where on a national program where we face a national security threat, the accountability, in my mind, should be at headquarters. That is coupled with the necessity of having the information in a centralized database with sufficient number of analysts, and those analysts having the capability to generate the reports that an intelligence agency has traditionally done. We have not filled that void in the past. We have to do a better job of gathering our intelligence, analyzing that intelligence, and disseminating that intelligence. And those are the two critical items I believe that the Bureau has to address in order to prevent, or do the best we can to prevent another circumstance such as that which happened on September 11th.
Director Tenet, there are a number of things that we saw in the 90s that would suggest that the likelihood of an attack was greater, and every several years that happened. But there's no doubt that you personally believed that we had reached a new level in December of '98 when you made a statement that we were declaring war on al-Qaeda. From the time that you made that declaration, what specific things changed within the CIA to reflect your concern over an imminent attack?
Well, first of all, you actually had a strategic plan that you put in place about how to attack the target, whose plan was not only to collect more intelligence, but to get in the sanctuary and attack it, and gain as much intelligence as you possibly can. I mean, we've heard all these stories about, well, they didn't speak the languages, they couldn't get in the target. So number one, you have to have a plan. You have to hold yourself accountable to the plan. You have to personally lead the execution of the plan. We put more people on it. We put as much money. We asked you for more money. We asked the administration for more money. We created a worldwide coalition of partners who we relentlessly badgered to say, you have to be in this fight with us to augment our numbers. And the other thing is you have to remember, it's not just what goes on at headquarters in the center, it's what's going on in the field, and trying to grow more case officers while you're fighting this, trying to grow more analysts that you surge overseas, try to resurrect a clandestine human capability that, quite frankly, everybody had ignored. And we were in terrible shape. So the whole focus is build your infrastructure and get after this problem and bring as many people to the fight as you possibly can around the world to augment your own numbers, and keep your eye focused on the target and figure out what the right balance is between the people at headquarters and the people in the field, to get the tools out there where the operations are run, where the tracing needs to be done, and the technical operations. And all I can tell you is if you see the pace of operations that we are sustaining today, it's because the foundation was built, the plan was in place, and the dollars that have shown up have made an enormous difference in terms of flexibility. What we still don't have are enough people. So we're going to keep robbing people. We have 900 people in Counterterrorism Center today. It's probably not enough. You got hundreds more sitting overseas working this target almost exclusively, and what we need to keep calibrating is how much more can we do to do everything we know how to do to stop the next attack.
Director Mueller, in the 90s, we had the World Trade Center bombing. In 93, we had the threat of airline use for attacks that came out of the trials in 95. We had the threats on the New York tunnels in 95, and I think both you and Director Tenet have alluded to others. In an earlier hearing, Dale Watson, the head of CT at the FBI, said prior to 9/11 there was a 98% likelihood that the attack would be abroad. Given the facts just covered and the targets being domestic, what process do you understand that the FBI went through to come to a conclusion that there was only a 2% likelihood that an attack would happen domestically here in the United States?
I'm not actually certain as to how Dale came to the 2%. I do believe, and I have heard, not being myself familiar with it or familiar with the warnings that were coming out during the summer leading up to September 11th. And my understanding, and I think George can talk to it perhaps more than I, most of those, or many of those warnings, related to attacks overseas. And that may have skewed the analysis to believe that because we're getting these warnings in, they're talking about attacks overseas, there's a less of a likelihood that it'll be in the United States.
Well, I think even Director Tenet said earlier one of the biggest mistakes was here we caught somebody crossing the border and we didn't ask enough questions or suspect what else might be there that was targeted here. We had already had example after example after example of domestic targets, whether the attacks were thwarted or not. And I guess my question is more, what do we currently do within the FBI to analyze what the domestic threat is?
Well, there are a number of levels, and it's not, I would reiterate, it's not just the FBI, because part of one of the, I think, valid considerations or concerns are over the years is that we have treated our intelligence and law enforcement on the one hand separate from our foreign intelligence. In other words, we have a CIA that looks overseas, we have the FBI that looks within the United States, and for a long time that worked where you didn't have an issue such as counterterrorism which floods across borders. And so when we look at the threat against the United States now, we take into account issues such as the bombing in Bali. That is significant with regard to the threat within the United States. We did not always do that, I don't believe. Apart from that, we look at the vulnerabilities within the United States. We look at the various investigations, both preliminary and full, that we have around the United States to determine whether or not there is any threat information that comes out. Where we have an issue that comes to the fore where we believe that there needs to be additional analytical research given to it, we now give it that analytical research. If you can recall, back in the wake of September 11th, there was some belief that there was the possibility of using crop dusters, and that had come out in a couple of threat warnings. And when that happens, we pull everything relating to crop dusters. We alert each of our field offices to go out and coordinate with each of the fields. When something like that comes along, we utilize both our people in the field as well as our analytical capability to put together a picture of what the actual threat is and integrate it with what George has from his people overseas.
Let me stop you there. Unfortunately, I'm running out of time, and there are a couple other areas I need to try to cover. Director Mueller, we had the chief of police from Baltimore testify at one of the open hearings. And I think both you and Director Tenet, as well as I think most members on this inquiry, would say that we had a breakdown of communication and an inability to disseminate information, and that contributed in some way, shape, or form to September the 11th. This chief of police said, I thought after September the 11th things would change and the communication between federal and local would get better. And the fact was he came to testify to say that it hadn't. Is that a surprise to you, and what is being done to try to open up that line?
Well, I did indicate in my opening statement that there were selected witnesses called to testify. I don't believe that this particular witness is representative of the feeling in the field. Does his testimony surprise me? I would say probably not. But I will tell you, every time that I have, and I've reached out to this particular individual in the past and asked him to call me if there are any concerns, whenever I've seen either publicly or in testimony before this committee or another committee that there is a police chief who is not getting what he or she wants, I have picked up the phone and called them to try to address those concerns.
But it is the intent of the FBI to open those lines of communication.
Now, let me finish by saying that I got and I don't know whether I'm not certain when this testimony was. It was probably in September, but it's a letter from William Burgers, the president of the IACP. And the letter praises us for the changes we've made to address this particular problem. And I'll just read one paragraph. It is my belief that the steps you have taken have been very responsive to these concerns and clearly demonstrate the FBI's commitment to enhancing its relationship with state and local law enforcement and improving our ability to combat not only terrorism, but all crime. I was at the IACP 2 weeks ago. I talked to the hierarchy, and I believe that they are supportive. There are isolated individuals throughout the United States who do not believe we're doing enough, and there are areas where we still have a ways to go. Getting clearances for chiefs of police, exchange of information all the way down and getting it back up. We have a number of joint terrorism task forces that are working exceptionally well around the country, and I think if you went to 9 out of 10 or 99 out of 100 or 55 out of 56, you will find the state and locals, police, very supportive of the relationship. There will always be one, there will always be two, and we try to address them as they come along. But
Director Tenet?
Well, I think here's a place that I think that we can be very helpful to Bob and the FBI. I mean, look, let me just put it in a couple of ways. There's nothing ambiguous about the strategic threat or the targets they're thinking about or what they're looking at. It's not ambiguous anymore. Who are the most important people in the battle? The most important people in the battle are the people on the street in localities around the country who actually know their street, actually know their neighborhood, actually know people who are coming in and out of those neighborhoods. And what we need to do is basically, if you build a system that basically is based on the old rules, then we're not going to meet their needs. We need to give them products that are content rich, that reveal nothing about sources and methods and methodologies, that allows them to understand what we're looking at so they can be attuned to what they need to do to help us. And it's critical for this to succeed, and some of the things we're doing together, there's a lot of strategic analysis, target-based analysis, all kinds of papers we've written, sharing with the FBI. We need to bring those people in, sit them down, educate them, and then provide training to their people about how to think about this target, and they got a lot of other things to do. But the smartest guy is the cop on the beat, because he or she sees things that nobody in a Washington bureaucracy is ever going to see.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, you have been extremely generous with the time. I would only ask, as I end my questioning, I wanted to get into the communications between CIA and FBI and the FAA. We have tried for some weeks now to get from both agencies the specific communications that took place in the calendar year of 2001 from either of the agencies specifically to the FAA or to airlines. And if you two directors would help us at pushing that a little bit within your own organizations so that we can look at those documents and understand better what was shared with the FAA and or airlines, it would be helpful.
But we do know, and we will do that for the record, Mr. Chairman. We do know the other thing you need to be aware of is there was in this time period and continues to be a very active counterterrorism group down at the NSC who convened all of the stakeholders, reviewed the bidding, and in part I think there were 2 advisories issued last summer. I mean, there was nothing specific, although there was a heightened period of alertness, and the result was 2 advisories, but you know, we didn't have a specific to help them. And I think that we have FAA representatives in our center, and we'll come back to you but this is where Homeland Security is really going to make a difference.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.